In the last few weeks, we've seen incredible examples of resilience, courage, and compassion. But what if I said to you that resilience is overrated, at least in terms of educational systems? Let's explore that a little bit further. Education has always been underscored by the belief that through education, we produce strong, resilient, and capable individuals. Of course, these are absolutely worthwhile goals for educators to strive for. I know many that are doing incredible work in schools with students today in the context of such challenging times. However, an education system that focuses on resilience highlights a very important point, that in order to become resilient, one must adjust to or overcome misfortune. Let's think about that for a moment. Education as a series of misfortunes for students to overcome? Is this really the education system we want to have for the 21st century? I think we can do better. While educators can and should support students to grow, blossom, and reach their fullest potential, they must also take on the task of addressing the barriers and inequities that exist in education today. I call on all educators to become educational activists. My name is Awneet Sivia, and I've been an educator for over 30 years. My role in preparing new teachers for the profession sits at the heart of this issue. How can educators, on the one hand, create spaces in classrooms and schools that build up students, while on the other hand, also look critically and deeply at the structures embedded in education systems that prevent them from doing that? How do we help build resilience while still looking at the issues that cause students to be resilient, have to be resilient in the first place? Some of you may have heard these expressions. You're so resilient. You've been so successful. You overcame so much. While it's important to acknowledge those goals and those wonderful accomplishments, it's also really important for educators to think about what are the structures that they had to overcome to get there. Let me share a few of those structures in education today. The formal curriculum. This is the curriculum that all students have to learn, but rarely includes the curriculum that students want to learn, or that they are interested in, or that reflects their lives. When I was a young child arriving to Canada as an immigrant settler many years ago, I realized that I had to find my way into a curriculum that did not reflect my life story, my identity, my cultural or linguistic community. Fast forward 20 years later, and as a new teacher entering the profession, I could see firsthand how poorly the formal curriculum actually responded to the diversity of students in my classroom. Not much had changed. Fast forward another 20 years, and educators today have so many more choices. They can include culturally diverse images, Indigenous stories by Indigenous authors, and a wide variety of content that represents and accurately depicts the range of gender identities and abilities in the community. They have access to websites, resources, and so many more materials than I did when I first started teaching. I have hope that this formal curriculum can become a better mirror of and window into the real world of students. The research even tells us that these kinds of culturally diverse approaches have a direct correlation and positive correlation with increased student achievement. In one of my recent classes in an education course, I shared a book about a young South Asian Canadian boy who was navigating his life between home, family, school, and community, and his cultural community. Several of my students commented on how much that story resonated for them, that it was the first time for some of them to see their own lived experiences as young people reflected positively and with such compelling words that represented their own life stories. It was a transformative moment for them, but not just for them. It was transformative for the whole class, because suddenly everybody realized how important it is to have a culturally relevant curriculum for all learners. It was a simple choice: which story to read, which book to choose. In making that choice, I removed one of the barriers of no representation and created a space where students could see themselves in the curriculum. Another structure is something called the hidden curriculum. This is the unspoken and implicit cultural, social, academic messages that are conveyed to students in schools. Sometimes these are revealed through the kinds of awards that are given, the clubs that are available to students at schools, the displays on the bulletin boards, the structures and the timetables that are given, and of course those textbooks that haven't changed much over time. These hidden curriculum structures tend to favor those in the dominant majority. So how can we change that? I encourage educators to think about different ways to unpack those structures by creating more collaborative learning environments through group work, problem solving, and inquiry. The third structure is something called the content without context. This is the content that really hasn't changed much over time. It has very little connection to real life. It's the content that is taught as facts rather than possibilities, answers rather than questions, and the what without the why. How many of you remember your education that way? I certainly do, and students as recent as a decade ago would say the same thing. Who you are and who I am become unimportant in a content without context, because our life stories and our interests are not reflected in the curriculum. Instead, educators can choose all kinds of current events and global information to bring into the classroom and make it more relevant. They can ask questions like, how does knowing this connect to who you are? What does this tell you about who you are? Why is it important for you to know this? And what will you do with what you've learned? If we can remove and address these kinds of structures in schools, I believe educators can really transform education in the 21st century. I began my talk by saying that education and resilience in education is overrated. Now I would say resilience is symptomatic. It's symptomatic of the systemic barriers that still exist in education. I call on all educators to become educational activists, look deeply at those structures, question them, and change them. You have the power within you to do that. Now that is equity in education. Thank you.